Telemati, bye bye, sumambo. Telemati, bye bye, sumambo. Telemati, sumambo. Telemati, sumambo. Telemati, bye bye, sumambo.
Hello, and welcome to the conference on the Food and Agriculture Organization, Agricultural Heritage Systems, Perspectives and Opportunities. My name is Marta Messa, and I'm the director of Slow Food Europe and the moderator of this event today. This conference is part of the activities organized within the framework of the initiative Terra, Madre, Salone del Gusto to illustrate the objectives and potential of the Food and Agriculture Organization GIAHS program for the sustainable development of rural areas, following the collaboration of Slow Food within the project Building Capacity Advanced International Application course on globally important agricultural heritage systems, so GIAHS for the rest of the meeting. We have a very interesting panel of speakers today, who I already welcome and thank for their participation. We will be hearing from Professor Mauro Agnoletti. Is chairman of the Food and Agriculture Organization GIAHS Scientific Advisory Group and scientific coordinator of the Building Capacity, as mentioned before, Advanced International Application course on the GIAHS project. We will also be hearing from Professor Michele Altieri. He's Professor Emeritus at the University of California, Berkeley, and very active member of the research group who developed the GIAHS program from the very beginning. And we will also be hearing from Roberto Ridolfi, who's president of Link 2007, an association that brings together many civil society organizations in Italy, and former assistant director general at the FAO. So to contextualize the conference and the topic today, we are of course, living a very specific moment in human history. And this post-pandemic reconstruction offers an opportunity to change the path and invest in global food systems that are resilient to future shocks, that are promoting sustainable and diversified agriculture, capable of driving sustainable growth and protecting natural resources. So the question is, what is the development model that we want to pursue? Now, several international organizations have developed different approaches to recognize and preserve traditional and sustainable local food systems, highlighting not only the importance of the system themselves, but the key role and work of small-scale farmers in providing precious economic and social services, and in maintaining these traditions and biocultural heritage for humanity, as well as other benefits. By strengthening a sense of identity, ownership, and pride among farmers' communities, these approaches can significantly support sustainable food systems. Now to the GIAHS. This initiative was launched in 2002 and established as a corporate program in 2015. And it's an approach that has evolved to capitalize on specific aspects of traditional agriculture for its conservation and sustainable development. And the program aims to highlight unique agricultural practices in communities that link food and livelihood security, agrobiodiversity, culture, and landscape in a systemic approach. As of June 2020, there were 61 designated GIAHS sites around the world. So much from my side, because I think now it's interesting to dive into the perspective and insights that the different speakers have to offer today. And I would like to give the floor to Mauro Agnoletti, who is gonna talk to us about traditional food systems as a driver for rural development. Mauro, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Let me try, I've already been introduced, so I would like to upload my presentation that is here. I hope you can see it now. Yeah. So the topic is to discuss the opportunity offered by this still new approach to agriculture and sustainability But in my case, I would like to include this in the framework of rural development. So to explain how this approach can contribute also to the life of farmers and citizens in a rural area, as well as contributing to the problems the world today is facing in environmental terms. So, as you know, we have an agenda, the 2030 agenda, with 17 goals to achieve. And in this respect, the organization like the FAO has developed new ways of understanding and looking at the role of agriculture. So when we speak about the agriculture promoted by GIAHS, we have to realize that we do this not just because we like traditional agricultural system and only system that must be sustainable, but also we are speaking about the failure of intensive agriculture in responding to the problems of many, many rural areas across the world. So when we're speaking of an alternative way of developing agriculture, it's not just because we like traditions or history, or we simply care for sustainability, but we are saying that this kind of agriculture is not been effective in many, many different parts of the way, creating several problems to which we have to respond. Even in a continent like Europe, when we are considering the different types of agriculture, so intensive agriculture and the less intensive agriculture, we can see there is a very varied situation where we have countries and where we have specialized cultivation that really have been developed and present some kind of success in terms of amount produced per hectare and in terms of low labor cost and the capacity to put on the market a certain amount of food. But we have other areas instead where this tendency, this trend, this approach did not work, and today are suffering of a lot of problems that are connected with this kind of agriculture. So what we're trying to do with this approach is to concentrate on the fact that traditional agriculture, especially those who developed also the landscape that when considering having traditional feature, although they produce less, they are generally more efficient in terms of energy for its consumption. And this is very important considering also the contribution to carbon emissions and to the global trend in the changing of the climate. Therefore, what our research shows that in the past, we had a system, agricultural system that may be less productive in terms of amount per hectare, amount of the yield per hectare produced, but they were more efficient in terms of energy. So the amount of energy input that you put in the system in order to produce is much less compared to modern system where you actually produce more per hectare, but the amount of external energy inputs required is much higher. So this is the point of which we are focusing in order to describe these types of less energy intensive agriculture as more sustainable concerning the concern for the environment. And the fact that this the modern agriculture has not been effective, this is true, as someone can be surprised about this, still for the European continent, where you see on the right side, we notice a decrease of the extension of farmed land that we can see from the north of the continent, from the Scandinavian peninsula down to Italy, but we could introduce also data for Poland or France, where in fact what we see people is abandoning rural areas because they cannot meet the expectation of the market in terms of amount produced and labor cost. And this is creating lots of problems because the abandon of rural areas contribute also to the process of increasing the extension and the density of people living in urban area. And so the fact that we have changed the the rate of rural population compared to the population living in urban areas is also the result of this trend. And so we have migration not only from the countryside to the cities, but also from the south to north. And this has a lot to do with agriculture, with the way we are approaching the problem of rural development in these areas. We also have, as an effect of these trends, a reduction of the landscape diversity, which is not just an aesthetic factor. It has to do with some quality related, for instance, to the biodiversity, and also to the complexity of different food systems that you can have in this area, as well as to the attractiveness of this area for tourism, especially rural tourism. Today, in many areas, tourism is offering a strong contribution also to the farmer itself. And so considering the approach proposed by FAO, the fact of having criteria concerning food, the quality of the food, not just the amount of food produced, but also the agrobiodiversity related to the system, that has been included recently in the revision of the criteria of the GIAHS program into the main bigger framework of biocultural diversity, the local and traditional knowledge system, the cultural value system and social organization, as well as the landscape, but considering a modern approach, not just from the aesthetic point of view, it's offering really the opportunity to propose something different. And another thing to consider that, and still Europe is a good example for this, as you noted, we're speaking about traditional knowledge and cultural feature, and you can find even in our countries different level of cultural feature in the European landscape that are mostly due to the activities related to agriculture, to livestock raising, and to forestry. And so there is still, even in the north of the world, important heritage concerning tradition that can be still understood and analyzed in order to collect information on how to develop a different form of agriculture, because all what we are talking about here is a kind of agriculture that's been rarely formalized into scientific text, but that you find actually only in oral tradition or in the practice that farmers, foresters, and shepherds do across the continent and many other areas of the world. An important point of this approach is a different consideration that we have of biodiversity. And from the point of view of the approach chosen not only by FAO, but also by UNESCO and Convention on Biological Diversity, we are speaking about biocultural diversity, considering biodiversity itself as an historical process. So when culture arrive in the world, on the planet, humans interfere with the genetic diversity, and so from the point of view of the phenotype and the genotype of the species. So what you have today is a biodiversity that in many cases is the result of this co-evolution between humans and nature, having a level of biodiversity which is basically due to the agricultural activity. And so from a position where we always, at least in the past, considered the man as a factor of disturbance in the ideal trophic chain that are related especially to natural system, where you have predators, secondary carnivorous, and herbivorous, and primary producers, we go to an approach instead where the man is at the center of the system. And so the level of biodiversity, as you know, is not only related to the alpha diversity. Often people is just concentrated in alpha diversity, so in species and only on certain species. We're speaking about agriculture as an area where the complexity of the landscape mosaic, so the complexity of different crops, especially small-scale crops with a big contribution of trees and shrubs and bushes, along with the normal crops you're cultivating, is creating a level of biodiversity that is specifically related to the activity of the farmers. So we are speaking about the good farmers, good farming system in terms of conservation of the level of biodiversity, but this biodiversity, as I said, is specifically related to this agricultural system. So when we speak about promoting the biodiversity in these rural areas and in this agricultural system, we're speaking about this. And so from the point of view of rural development, what we are witnessing today is the possibility to consider I would say, a new idea of quality, which is considered an integrated concept of quality, putting together the landscape intended as the result on the environmental factor of the biostructure of the biodiversity that is expressed together with the cultural value by also the form, the shape of the territory that is associated with the quality of the food. So what we are saying here is not just that we have a nice food and a beautiful landscape, it was in the past. It's just the way we produce is creating a certain type of landscape, which becomes an important element of the quality. So it's an added value that cannot be replicated by a competitor. And this is true in the argan forest that we have in Morocco, as well as in the most developed rural area we have in Tuscany. It's true for the rice terraces we have in China, or from the chapas that we have in Central America. So this is a level of quality can be supported not only by tourism and also by certification labels that are not just indicating the geographic denomination or origin. So this product is produced here, or there is a process of production where we ensure the consumers that we are taking care of the environmental quality, but something a bit more comprehensive. And that can be part of the different level rural development that in our view must be developed in order to succeed in developing a different form of agriculture that otherwise cannot adopt the modern methods that intensive agriculture is approaching. This is actually the topic and the importance of the course we develop here in Florence, together with the Italian Agency for International Cooperation, where we accept students from many different countries. We are at the second year of this program. So we are training students in order to create managers of this agricultural system. And so we've been, I would say, quite successful in receiving students, supporting them, living here. And we received many, many applications, about 80 applications. This is my last slide, Marta, so I'm finished. So thank you for your attention, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you so much, Mauro, and it was a lot. I know 10 minutes, it's tough to pack in so much information, but thank you for this very interesting overview. And I know that the beginning of your presentation was particularly focusing on Europe, and as we've had the chance to discuss in another occasion, there is also the interesting interaction, of course, between how policymaking is basically shaping landscapes and is shaping how many farmers are active, and is shaping like the incentives to create or certain kinds of farms compared to others. And to pick up on what you said and move on to the presentation by Professor Altieri, I think like you've also had a very interesting slide on biodiversity and cultural diversity and how that is the process of the evolution. And one of the things that we find very interesting in the different conversations we're having is that when we talk about biodiversity, it's a whole world. And as Low Food, we're interested in biodiversity at large, but specifically in food biodiversity. And in that sense, it's very interesting to look at what is being cultivated in terms of the diversity of varieties, but also in terms of the diversity of breeds that are being farmed. And I think that's also where agroecology really comes in to help promote biodiversity in a broad sense, as well as biodiversity in the fields. And I'll stop here, and indeed the floor goes to Miguel on the significance of agroecology, indeed, and traditional farming in the GIAHS process. Miguel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marta and Professor Agnoletti, for the invitation. I was honored to be part of the GIAHS process during its beginnings in FAO with Pardes Kuhafkan. Agriculture has been the result of the coevolution between society and nature. And we have systems all over the world that have stood the test of time, and they've been farming for thousands of years, leaving us a legacy that is important to consider for the design of future systems. There is about 1.5 billion farmers, small farmers, who occupy only about 20% of the land and produce about 70% of the food. And I would argue that about a third of those farmers still contain elements of traditional knowledge, very sophisticated ethnobotanies and other types of local knowledge of agriculture, which has resulted in systems of remarkable importance. For example, the coffee systems, the coffee forests in South America and Central America, where farmers, for example, have to manage a tremendous diversity of crops, like 150 species associated with coffee. This is guided by a very important knowledge that these farmers have about how to manage these complex systems, resulting in systems that are very productive, that not only produce food for self-sufficiency, but also they produce food for markets, national and international markets. And we have in Latin America a tremendous legacy of agricultural systems like the Andean systems that are part of the GIAHS process. We have at about 3,500 meters above sea level, the Waru-Warus, which are very interesting systems of agriculture and aquaculture that actually prevent frost because the water absorbs the heat during the day, releases it at night, offsetting the effects of frost. So for climate change adaptation, this kind of lessons from these systems are very important. We also have the Chinampa systems near Mexico City that were systems that were created by the Aztecs, and they fed millions of people. They still, there's about 40 to 50 hectares left, another legacy where many principles of agroecology are at play, where we can extract them and learn lessons of sustainability and resiliency. So we see that we have throughout the world systems that feature adapted agrobiodiversity that is of global importance, not only for local importance. They are embedded in strong agrarian culture, which has been able then to manage and conserve this diversity, and they're very ingenious forms of use, and traditional knowledge, which allows a creative dialogue with current knowledge. This is important, the co-innovation, the co-creation of knowledge. And the biodiversity and cultural diversity are linked, and they depend on each other. And this cultural diversity embedded in these traditional agroecosystems has been essential for the development of agroecology as we see it in Latin America. So agroecology is basically a marriage of knowledge, it's a dialogue of wisdoms between the Western disciplines like ecology and sociology and agronomy and some of the social sciences, and the traditional farmer knowledge. And from this dialogue, we derive principles, universal principles that allow us to manage systems to be more sustainable, more resilient, and so on and so on. So for example, the GIAHS that were created, and I understand there are many more now, these systems are very important because they have ingenuity, they have proven history of sustainability and resilience, they have exceptional characteristics, not only agrobiodiversity, but also cultural diversity and so on, and they have global and local importance. So one example of the GIAHS that I'm very familiar with is the one in Chiloé Island in south of Chile, where there's dynamic conservation, which is a fine balance between the conservation of the essential elements of biodiversity and culture that is open to incorporate new forms of knowledge without eroding the basis of the system. Conserve the resources and culture that give rise to the denomination, and generate a strategy that produces benefits for local communities under a model where cultural identity is one of the main dimensions. So women, for example, play a very important role in the GIAHS process in Chiloé. They have been the guardians of hundreds of varieties, land races of potatoes. It's a secondary center of origin of potato. But they also have been able to transform many types of agricultural and non-agricultural products into markets that have this, the GIAHS, the CIPAM in Spanish, label, giving it a kind of an additional feature for marketing. So the features of Chiloé CIPAM is a highly developed agroecological base with explicit attributes to cultural diversity, very diversified silvogricultural and livestock production systems based managed with agroecology. The development of many products processed in different stages, but that are based on the quality, tradition, and innovation. And also the development of non-agricultural activities like tourism, which has been affected lately by COVID. So the other thing is that there are many systems that are GIAHS but have been degraded because of erosion, because of deforestation, cattle ranching, intrusion of industrial agriculture and so on. So there's a very important work for the restoration of these systems, and we call it agricological restoration, the marriage between agroecology and landscape ecology, where we talk not only direct strategies for farm biodiversity conservation, but landscape biodiversity, as Mauro was saying. All that will lead to resiliency. So there are many elements that we can use in the restoration of landscapes, not only concentrating at the farm level, but at the landscape level. And let me give you some examples. For example, in Oaxaca, these areas that in the highlands of Oaxaca, these areas that were totally affected by degradation, indigenous people decided to stay in these areas instead of migrating, starting a process of restoration. First, establishing forest cover with Pinus oaxacensis, a local pine variety, at the top of the mountains, then soil conservation practices, water retention practices, water harvesting techniques, and so on that allowed for the restoration of agriculture. Here in Colombia, there's a very interesting community near the Cauca Valley where they had to restore the watershed because they didn't have water. So today there's enough water after the restoration of the community, children, young people, women, men, etc. And also this was accompanied by the transformation of the agricultural systems from monocultures of arracacha, which is a tuber crop, to these very complex agroforestry systems based on agroecological principles. So now there's water for people, for animals, and for food production. Now, what we have seen is that these more biodiverse systems are much more resilient to climate change. For example, the studies that have been done in Central America, for example, after Mitch, show that agroforestry systems based on biodiverse agricultural systems were much more resistant to the destruction by the hurricane, especially mudslides, compared to the monocultures. If you look at what happened in Cuba with AICS, also the monoculture industrial farms were much more affected than these more complex agroforestry systems that have more cover, more windbreaks, and other features that allow them to be more resilient to climate change. So we see that the agroecosystem resiliency to climate change is connected to the vegetational diversity, the landscape matrix, and also how farmers manage their soil and water. So what we're talking about is that GIAHS can provide elements for the design of a new agriculture that is going to be decoupled from fossil fuel dependence, that is going to have low environmental impacts because industrial agriculture, as Mauro was saying, has a huge ecological toll on the environment, is resilient to climate change and other shocks, is multifunctional and not only produces food, but also maintains cultural, social, ecological services, and is the foundation of local food systems because, as Mauro was saying, in 2030, 70% of the population is going to be living in cities. A city of 10 million people has to import 6,000 tons of food per day, which travels 1,000 kilometers. That's totally unsustainable. We need to create local food systems. And also, GIAHS is providing the basis for the elements for the reconstruction of agricultural systems managed by farmers. For example, these farmers in Cuba have transformed their system from tobacco monoculture. Actually, this is Casimiro that has been connected with Slow Food for a long time, to this very diversified farm, which actually has an energy efficiency of 30. One kilocalorie goes in, they harvest 30. Industrial agriculture has an energy efficiency of about 1.5. And so an important lesson from COVID-19 is that we need to urgently put food production in the hands of small producers, peasant, and urban farmers, because it's the only way to ensure the supply of fresh food at affordable prices and in local markets away from the change of the global market. This retooling of the system, however, based on short supply chain, will require providing small farmers with land, seeds, water, equitable markets, and so on. We know that from many studies that supporting small farmers have huge benefits, enhance food sovereignty, promote local economic growth, generate employment, reduce poverty, promote diverse diets and better nutrition, and local access to healthy food, which is very important in times of pandemic. And basically, the route is whether we're going to go from tradition to modernity to post-modernity, or can we design systems that are based on traditional systems and design the post-COVID-19 agriculture based on the elements of traditional agriculture. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Miguel. It's super interesting, and like even just the pictures that you showed really made us all understand in a glimpse the value of such diversified ecosystems. Even just a picture of it really speaks thousands of words. And it's very interesting. This is something that came up also in the first presentation by Mauro Agnoletti, but that there is this issue of the productivity, like the yield per hectare. And in some of the political debates, some of the directors of Food Europe, I'm following a lot of the political debates here and participating in them. And there's this big concern with producing more per hectare. There's this continuous rush to increasing production without taking a bigger look at the whole picture. So, and besides the fact that we do have evidence that like diversified agroecological food systems do produce in fact more, but are also more resilient, more adaptable to climate change, respect local communities and tradition and culture. So this is some evidence that it's really important to inform decision makers globally, really in this moment as we are hopefully soon moving past this pandemic period. And also what you mentioned about the co-creation of knowledge, that is another super important message. One of the debates that are happening at the political level is, for instance, the introduction of new what we call new GMOs, or the new breeding technologies like genome editing, and these techniques that are, if you want, can be very highly questionable. And there is the issue of, you know, who has the ownership, who can really have access to these technologies, who do they serve, to whose benefit they are, and the input, the value of all the years of experience of agroecology and indigenous communities managing ecosystems is really that the answer is already there, and it's much better placed in the hands of the local communities producing food for themselves. With this, I would like to pass on to Roberto Ridolfi, who's gonna talk to us about human and natural ecosystems for sustainable agriculture. Roberto, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marta, and thank you very much for the scientific presentations by Mauro and Miguel. But I think they ended up the presentation with a question, isn't it? Is that possible to take the tradition and put it into the postmodern, as you say, or the post-pandemic reconstruction, which is the question of our conference, indeed. You pose very rightly. So post-pandemic reconstruction offers an opportunity to change the path and invest in a global food system that is resilient to food future shocks, promoting sustainable and diversified agriculture, capable of driving sustainable growth and protecting natural resources. This is Bengodi, this is paradise. This is paradise, but we do need a new economic theory. So let me do a step back. Marta, you introduced me as former Director General Assistant, Director General at FAO, but I've done for 30 years the Director and the Ambassador of the European Union. And in Brussels, I was the Director of Planet and Prosperity. That's where I knew Carlin Petrini. And of course, I participated to one of the first Terra Madre in Torino, associated with Salone del Gusto. Well, take this binomium of Terra Madre and Salone del Gusto, for those that know it. For me, this is the question: how to make GIAHS to get out from the ghetto in which somebody wants GIAHS to be. I'm very serious. It's a niche, it's a small ghetto. How important, Mauro, is GIAHS in FAO in terms of personnel? Out of the 11,000 people working for FAO, tell me how many are working on GIAHS. Actually, don't tell us, because otherwise we will have to start a discussion. So the question is indeed that the inherent sustainability of a GIAHS ecosystem is not brought up to scale. Is simply left in a niche. Oh, this is nice, a sort of folkloristic niche. I'm very serious. It's the attitude of the mainstream agricultural business that wants to keep GIAHS approach into a ghetto. And that's where I want to elaborate my discourse. Starting, of course, from a couple of sentences that I have from Miguel about, and also example about the resilience of the food systems inside a GIAHS, let's say, ecosystem. We heard about the resilience vis-a-vis typhoons, etc., but also the resilience vis-a-vis shocks, biological shocks, pests. I was a fan of agroforestry 20 years ago when I was financing CGIAR research from Brussels. And I was a big fan of agroforestry because traveling and living 15 years in Africa, let me tell you that I have seen the power of this technique or technology, or rather, shall we say, culture. Is agroforestry culture or technology? Is agroforestry tradition or science? Well, it's both. I think that's where the postmodern matches with the tradition. So the word resilience is key in order to do, as in the cartel, in the manifesto of this conference, to look at the possibilities of driving sustainable growth, but at size, at scale, because it's not enough to do a sustainable growth for 25 people or a community of 300 people. We have to think on how that kind of approach is actually mainstreamed to all the others. This is my battle at the very moment. And as president of LINK 2007, which is a network of 13 big NGOs, some of them have been working for 70 years, 65, 70 years in Africa, in difficult places. And the tradition of LINK 2007 is to start a program, not a project, but a program that will never stop until possibly we don't solve the problems, which unfortunately is very difficult to eradicate. So my quest is for sustainability at large scale, and how the GIAHS, will be my conclusion, how the GIAHS can represent a modeling into sustainable food systems. And the example of the Mediterranean in that, which is, if you allow me, an enormous GIAHS. Let's think to a second level GIAHS, and I look at the Mediterranean Sea, and I look at the countries around, I look at the diet, I look at the culture, I look at the tradition, and I see, oh, this is inherently more sustainable than Minnesota farming, or Ukraine, or Russia farming, isn't it? Or monoculture farming. If you look at a sort of GIAHS of a second level. Now, SDGs, as I say, we need a new economic theory, which would be mainstream. Here, Mauro and Miguel are examples of people pursuing an economic approach which is inherently sustainable. But it's not always like that. Otherwise, we won't have Wall Street dominating the economic perspective. We do need economic theory to scale up and mainstream the circular economy, the sustainable economy, to go from a big, you mentioned, I think both of you mentioned the energy efficiency of a GIAHS system. This is striking, this is convincing, this is strong for economists, for even the bankers, but it's not working at the moment, Mauro, because we don't give a price to CO2 emissions, which are linked to energy. Otherwise, a kilo of produce from GIAHS system would cost much less than a kilo from an intensive pesticide, energy, water intense culture. It's not yet the case. An apple with pesticide and fertilizer is bigger and look nicer than a small apple biological which cost more because produce less, and therefore we have a problem with the consumers. Don't look at Terra Madre clients. These are special people. But the other majority, we need to talk to the other majority of consumers. So we want, in pending a new economic theory, we want to use the SDGs as a proxy of this new theory. And agriculture is a perfect example, as I enjoyed saying during my 3 years at FAO. Agriculture and the food systems, let me be precise, the food systems are a perfect example of big impact on sustainability as such. And of course, they are in their need of democracy, equality, without which the poor farmer in a GIAHS system will never be rewarded for the eco services that is providing for humanity. Mauro comes from Tuscany, and I had a friend visiting me. I am in Latium, but still in a nice place. And of course, people looking at the landscape, they think that that landscape was designed by an architect. If you go in a hill in Tuscany and you look around, you say, oh, this is a beautiful design. Who did that? And this is the collective action of tradition and culture of hundreds of farmers or thousands of farmers that thought and pursue a same path. Now, this is the link between tradition and postmodernity. It is the culture, the tradition of a place that gives dignity to the people living there. It would not have happened if the farmers in Tuscany would have rushed to Milano or to Torino to work for Fiat. I'm sorry, but this is the reality. If all the farmers in Tuscany would have to travel to Torino to work in Fiat to get a salary, that beautiful landscape would not have been maintained and nurtured. The key question is, and I make it as a sort of a rhetorical question to Mauro and Miguel, is it not true that GIAHS, contrary to many other systems, is able to actually increase the natural capital, whereas other food systems actually consume natural capital by reduction of biodiversity, by consuming water in excess, by cutting trees, and so forth. So the real question is, who can build natural capital like a GIAHS system, and who in fact is destroying the natural capital, but without paying the cost? The big apple red out of pesticides will cost much more than the small grayish biological apple if the cost of capital consumed by the pesticide would be, and by loss of biodiversity, would be accounted for. So for me, this is a key point. Let me move towards the proposal there. So to get GIAHS out of a niche, of a nice ghetto, but still a ghetto, I think we need to strongly reaffirm the cost of natural capital is an essential factor to be factored in the food systems, without which the advantages, economic advantages of the GIAHS system will not prevail into the normal consumer market. And that is pending the new economic theory that, of course, will do that automatically. We don't have it. So we cannot contrast Adam Smith on the simple ground of a niche or of a small, even though beautiful, but still ghetto. So the added value, you say, cannot be replicated by competitors. This is a strong sentence in business. But is that true? Do we have a scale of impact that may generate that? In certain areas of Bordeaux and Chianti and Brunello di Montalcino, of course, where there is a Brunello with my surname, by the way, but it's not mine, unfortunately. We have this kind of value where farming means the potential of sending your children to Harvard University. Can we define farming like that? When farming will have the potential for me to send my children to Harvard University, farming will be a sexy job to look for. It is not the case if you go to Africa, where I lived for many years. So in conclusion, I think that let's call the GIAHS also a sustainable food system that can and should be replicated. So instead of 61 GIAHS, we should have 1,000, 10,000, 20,000, I don't know. And I want to call you into this kind of argumentation with a sustainable food system in the Mediterranean, which I'm working on. I'm working on a platform to set up this sustainable food system, community of practice, examples, NGOs, farmers, fishers, foresters, and of course shepherds. When we say farming, we include everything, all the different ecosystems that are able to face the market in a very strong way, which also required, as I think Slow Food knows, via the different initiatives in the years, a different consumer attitude, a mature consumer attitude, which is the case in very mature economy, in Canada, in UK, in Denmark, in Italy, but it's not yet the case in developing economies. So I think I will stop here for this first intervention, how to conjugate Terra Madre and Salone del Cibo, Salone del Gusto, GIAHS and sustainable food system in the Mediterranean area. So the GIAHS expands its outreach, through which becomes, therefore, something that can be mainstreamed. This is my quest, of course, and I'm happy to continue.
Thank you so much, Roberto. Thank you so much. And I think your question is brilliant for the last round of comments. We have about 3 minutes each, but I think, you know, the four of us here and probably most of the people who are listening to this conversation today do already believe fully, or at least in part, in the value of the GIAHS and in the value of agroecology. So the question is, we need to get out there and engage in the discussion with those who do not believe that this is the case, those who...
We become 4 million.
Say again?
How can we become 4 million?
How can we become 4 million? So, and that's where maybe indeed there is the meeting point between a moment like Terra Madre organized by Slow Food, where at the end of the day, we are a global food movement with activists that in every corner of the world are active to promote this kind of food systems. But yes, we definitely need to get out of the ghetto. We need to talk to other people, and we need to also make sure that policies encourage this kind of developments, because otherwise it becomes really an uphill struggle. So having said this, I would really go in the last round of comments. I would say please not more than 3 minutes each, because we're running out of time. I let you all speak a bit longer because your interventions were way too interesting to stop them in the tracks. But maybe starting indeed from, you know, how do we take this forward? How do we make this mainstream? Maybe I can ask Mauro to first react to this question. Yeah.
Let me first address one point that what Miguel brought up, and I think is interested in the current times. For this, I need to show one slide that is helping me. Can you see this? Well, this is a slide showing the result of a research that we developed with the European Central Bank, the research department of the European Central Bank, that analyzed the distribution of infections of COVID-19 with the different types of development of the territory. So to make the long story short, what we notice is that the infections are more related to the level of development, so the intensity of development, rather than to the number of people, to the density of the population. And so just to say that here we have a modernity of this approach to considering less intensive agriculture, in terms of also something which is very up to date, is very modern. And the reason why the bank allowed us to collaborate with the bank for this thing is not just the result of the research from this point of view, but also the consideration deriving from this, which is to reduce the process of increasing this density of infrastructure and urban area, industrial development, even agro-industry, intensive agriculture in a few areas of Italy, where all this is concentrated, or intensive agriculture in Italy is occurring only in the 20% of the territory, and to repopulate the countryside, also favoring this low intensity energy system. So this is something to see how this, what we're discussing is related to something where it's very up to date, is occurring in these times. I'd be happy to provide the research paper to my colleagues Roberto and Miguel. There's no time for me to reply to all the questions that Roberto Ridolfi proposed. I totally agree with all these things are pressed into a niche, so they are not developed as they should. And in fact, in FAO, I always said that we don't have to consider this as special places having a uniqueness. So a few of them in each country just to show. No, I would like to have thousands of them, as you just said. But if I can make this long story short, I'm a believer. I developed in Italy the National Register of Historic Rural Landscape for the same reason why we had GIAHS. I was not aware of the GIAHS. I was called to collaborate with GIAHS by Paviskov Khan after he was aware that we developed this approach in Italy. And it was developed in 2012 with a ministerial decree. And what I noticed, and that's why it makes me feel positive about the future, Roberto, is that we started with a lot of skepticism about us. These people is taking care of things that had no importance. Then for 2 or 3 years, I would say we were slow. Now, in the last 5 years, we get to 25 sites registered and to 17 in line. If I have to tell you the truth, I'm old enough to be able to do the things how they are. The only limitation here are the politics that we do in agriculture. Because if we should listen to these territories and to the mayors and to the farmers, they say that this approach is the only chance we have for developing the rural territory. This is very important, as well as the fact that we have some success. I think I say, as in China, is already happening, the GIAHS site in China, but even with the National Register in Italy, some of these sites in Italy are already included into the GIAHS program. We are selling the products after 7 years. That's the first site we started to work on at the double of the price, which is quite an interesting thing. Because in this way, the children of these farmers, you may believe this or not, don't want to go to Berkeley or to UCLA. No, they want to stay. Because guess what? I have a daughter in UK, and she's in UK because she cannot be here. That's exactly what is happening. They need to have an opportunity. And I see from this small example, but I said there are other good examples, that if we work on this, it will take time. Maybe not me, but my children or somebody else will see the results. But I think that there is a power in what we do. And these things are convincing from many different points of view. So as you said, good to be paid for these multiple functions that that this kind of farming develops. So once that they will get paid for what they really do, we solve the problem. Okay.
Well, I ask you to wrap up, sorry, just so that we give a chance also to the other.
Yeah. Okay. I only want to say that compared to some of the policies we do also in environment, what I prefer is to give money to people when they do something, rather than give money to people to preserve the result of abandonment or to go back to a period where the man was not on the earth. And now I stop here, since all the the audience know what I'm talking about.
Thank you so much, Mauro. Miguel, if you want to react.
Yes, thank you very much. I wanted to see if I could share a presentation. Do you see it?
It's not yet, but I believe it's coming up soon.
Okay, but anyway, no, you don't see it?
No, we don't.
Okay, just a minute. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm losing my time here. Well, I'll start without the presentation. It's not here.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let me get my. First of all, agroecology has been recognized as the only viable approach to reach sustainability and resilience in agriculture, given the failure of modern agriculture. I would say that among the 1.5 billion billion farmers that are doing small-scale agriculture and that produce most of the food that we eat and that actually conserve the biodiversity and the landscapes that we're talking about, there is a huge increase in the use of agroecology among the grassroots through farmer-to-farmer networks. And this is being promoted by the Campesina and many other organizations. So agroecology is not a niche, it's not a ghetto, it's actually a grassroots approach that is being promoted and diffused all over the world, especially in Latin America. But agroecology, in order to scale up, and there are many ways in which it's being scaled up right now, the major barrier is the capitalist economy. You see, the food system is controlled by huge corporations that don't allow for the growth of this small farm sector. So it's fine that we give economic opportunities to farmers, but we have to level the ground, the field, in order for them to be viable. And for that, we need to create a bypass of territories managed agroecologically and markets that are driven more by solidarity than market economy. And there are many, many examples in Latin America of solidarious markets in which the food is being, that the chivo, buono, pulito, e justo is for everybody, not for the people that can send their kids to Harvard. It's for everybody, especially for the hungry people and the vulnerable people. So here, consumers play a huge role. We cannot put the weight of changing the food system on farmers only. And consumers, by supporting local farmers, they can create resiliency and sustainability in their communities. And they have a major political role in the sense that they can demand, once they become aware about the importance of GIAHS and agroecology, they can put pressure to change policies. And so I think that the only way to scale up agroecology and GIAHS as part of this process is through social movements that are going to pressure the local government, the national government, the international organizations in the right direction. Because as Mauro was saying, we have no other opportunity here. Industrial agriculture has created this pandemic through deforestation, exposing wildlife by destroying their habitat and creating zoonosis epidemics. And it's also dependent on huge amounts of pesticides and energy that we cannot afford. And we have the models of small-scale agriculture that are productive and that are providing the food for people. Hunger doesn't have anything to do with lack of food production. It's a problem of poverty, it's a problem of access to land, and so on and so on. So this is not only an ecological scientific approach, this is a political approach in which the new economic that is going to embed this new approach has to be totally different from the capitalist economy that is running the world right now, because that doesn't account for ecological externalities. And when these markets come up, these green markets come up, actually the ones that benefit are the usual ones, the big corporations. So the carbon markets, who's taking advantage of that? Big industry, not the small farmers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Miguel. Thank you so much. Roberto, a quick comment from your side on your own question.
Yeah, because I'm sorry, Miguel, but I didn't mean to put you in the ghetto. I am with you in the ghetto that others want us to force be in. And it's not the question of South America or Central America. It's the question, I think, worldwide. If you look at FAO today, there is a tendency to look at technology, drones, IT, and of course, chemicals as the solution, which is a little bit going back from what in FAO was 3-4 years ago when we promoted agroecology, the first agroecology conference. And again, Miguel, I must correct you, Harvard was an example on the right, which I think Mauro spotted, on the right of choice for farmers. And I would agree that if I would have an opportunity to stay farming and being happy, satisfying all the needs that I need satisfied for me and my family, I will not need to move into anything else. And again, I would also say that you say the only way to change is the social pressure in order for this to move. I would say that this is good, but must also involve consumers. If consumers' choice doesn't follow this social movement, we will not reach the objective until such a time, and I'm very happy that Miguel, for one thing, agrees with me that we need to change the economic theory. But I want to be very realistic. I am president of the most social NGOs in Italy pursuing the eradication of poverty. And myself, I've been for 35 years at this. Unfortunately, I don't see the results that we would like to see after 50, 60, 70 years of trying to fight and eradicate poverty. We are not yet there. So I think we have to apply a mix of tools. As you say, social pressure, social movements, this is on one hand. In many countries, unfortunately, we do see a revert of this. We do see sovereignism, we do see people fighting and chasing back migrants, which is all to be blamed, but unfortunately, it is a situation. So we have to be aware of the social constraints. We have to fight for a new economic theory, which will take time. In the meanwhile, I think I'm very, very in agreement with what Mauro said. We need, and we probably can do this kind of scaling up, accelerating the GIAHS process. I invite you to come and be part of the platform, Mauro, especially the University of Florence, the platform, and of course we will have interaction with Slow Food, the platform for sustainable food system in the Mediterranean Sea, because you will see this is based on community of practice. This is based on a good principled approach and infusing examples and experiences there to be shared with new entrants and maybe even commercial farmers that want to convert themselves to the post-pandemic situation will be a good approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Roberto. And thank you again so much, Mauro and Miguel as well. It's been great to engage in this conversation with three very passionate people. And I assure you that there are many more passionate people that have been following these. And I would say the take-home message for all of you who have been following this event is take action, support local food system, meet your farmers, buy food that is grown in a sustainable way, engage with others and convince your next door neighbor to do the same. We need to be many. We had one panel at the last Terra Madre that still happened in person in Turin that said they are giants, but we are multitude. We need to be many, we need to be acting, and we need to make of these agroecological practices and extremely valuable knowledge the mainstream and the solution that really will move us beyond this pandemic period. Thank you so much again to all of you, and I wish you all a good rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Marta. Well done. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Quelle mati, bye bye, su mambo. Quelle mati, bye bye, su mambo. Quelle mati su mambo. Quelle mati su mambo. Quelle mati,